whenever you'd like.
Great. Thank you, Lynette. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Welcome to the Thursday, August 18th, 2022 meeting of the SACOG Board of Directors. I will call the meeting to order. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Lynette, would you make your announcements and then please call the roll?
Thank you. Good morning. Just to let you know, this meeting is being streamed live on the website. For our board members who are in our boardroom this morning, welcome. We appreciate you being here. You will notice a table microphone in front of you. You do not need to pick it up to speak. You can just press the button, and when it is lit to green, your voice will be carried through the boardroom and into the Zoom platform online. For our board members who are joining us remotely, thank you also for being here. We would ask that you would mute your device, please, when you're not speaking so that we don't have any background noise. I'll go ahead and get started. Director Baines. Absent. Bernasconi.
Here.
Bradford.
Here.
Branscombe. Absent. Boulahan.
Here.
Burris.
Here.
Clark Kretz.
Here.
Desmond.
Here.
Frericks.
Here.
Frost.
Here.
Gallardo.
Here.
Gog.
Yes.
Gore.
Here.
Guerrero.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Kozlowski.
Here.
Lozano.
Here.
Middleton. Absent. New.
Here.
Saragosa.
Here.
Sander.
Here.
Sailor. Absent. Chenier. Absent. Spokley. Absent. Stallard.
Here.
Soon.
Here.
Thomas. Absent. West.
Here.
Vice Chair Kennedy.
Here.
Chair Jennings is absent, and ex officio member Tacker for Benny Paul.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. I assume we have a quorum.
We do, yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. It's my pleasure to step in and chair this meeting. Unfortunately, it's not under the best of circumstances, and I am asked to do so because our friend, colleague, and leader, Mr. Jennings, lost his father yesterday. So if we could just start this meeting with a brief moment of silence in support of our friend. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Madam Clerk, we go to the consent items.
Thank you. And just to let you know, Vice Chair Kennedy, we have no public communications.
Okay. Thank you. There are 12 items on consent. Is there any member of the board that would like to remove an item or have any questions of staff at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, moved by Director Saragosa, second by Director Swin. Again, last chance. Any questions? We have no public comment. Therefore, please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Baines. Absent. Bernasconi.
Yes.
Bradford.
Aye.
Branscombe. Absent. Boulahan.
Aye.
Burris.
Yes.
Clark Kretz.
Yes.
Desmond.
Aye.
Frericks.
Aye.
Frost.
Aye.
Gallardo.
Aye.
Gog.
Yes.
Gore. Guerrero.
Aye.
Harris.
Yes.
Joyner.
Yes.
Kozlowski.
Yes.
Lozano.
Aye.
Middleton. Absent. New.
Aye.
Sander.
Aye.
Saragosa.
Aye.
Sailor, absent. Chenier, absent. Spokely, absent. Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas, absent. West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
and Chair Jennings is absent. Motion carries.
Thank you. At this time, we will adjourn as the SACOG Board of Directors and reconvene as the Airport Land Use Commission. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. We have Greg Chu who will open this item.
I'm Greg Cho. I'm the staff for the Airport Land Use Commission. Actually, we have two items. First, there's a consent item, Mr. Vice Chair, and then there's an action item after that. I'm here for the action item.
Is there any questions of staff on the matter of consent? Is there any public comment, Madam Clerk?
There's no public comment.
Stellar moves a consent item, Mr. Chair.
New seconds.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Stallard, a second by Director New. Please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Baines, absent. Bernasconi,
Yes.
Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe, absent. Boulahan,
Aye.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Gore, Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton, absent. New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Zaragoza,
Aye.
Sailor, absent. Chenier, absent. Spokely, absent. Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas, absent. West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
and Chair Jennings is absent. Motion carries.
Thank you. On to our action item, staff report.
Okay, this is the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan for Mayfair Airport. This is the final step in a 5-year long process. I'm Greg Chu again with your planning staff at SACOG. I also serve as your Airport Land Use Commission staff. We can pull up the PowerPoint, please. While we're doing that, I'd like to introduce, we have Chris Jones, our consultant with Environmental Science Associates with us today, and Glenn Rickleton with the Sacramento County Department of Airports. They'll be available if there are questions regarding this item. Next slide, please. So the SACOG board serves as the Airport Land Use Commission. The board doesn't have many items on this, but occasionally it does have something. So for any board member that hasn't been on or had an item on this, basically the main purpose of the ALUC is to make sure that the land uses surrounding airports is compatible with the airport. So your role as the board is to coordinate airport compatibility planning following a series of state laws and guidance. We do that by adopting an airport land use compatibility plan, or ALUCP. And then when development applications come in from local agencies, cities and counties, and the development plans are near local airports, we reviewed the development application relative to what the plan says. So we serve the 4 counties of Sacramento, Sutter, Yuba, and Yolo counties. El Dorado and Placer counties each have their own airport land use commissions. This is designated by the state of California. Next slide, please. So what's in the plan? Basically, all plans have to basically look at ensuring that future land uses are compatible with airport operations. There's 4 specific policy areas. This is really the key of what's in the plan. We look at noise, safety, airspace protection, which is really height, and overflight protection or overflight notification, which is a subjective perceived indication of the airport. One important thing to note is these plans do not have anything to do with the operations or the facilities or anything on the airport property. It's actually about what goes on surrounding the airports. Next slide, please. As your staff, we bring policies and draft plans to the board for review. And then we implement the plans by working with local agencies, reviewing individual applications, looking for consistency recommendations to the board if it needs to go to the board, and then coordinating with Caltrans staff. So I mentioned that SACOG has this assigned role by state law, and Caltrans is the Division of Aeronautics is the entity that we at SACOG report to. Next slide, please. For local jurisdictions, basically they have to update their land use plans to be consistent with the plan that you're being asked to adopt here. We work in coordination with SACOG staff and city and county staff. They submit applications to us for review. And if there's a review that is not allowed in our plan, a city or county may override it with a 2/3 vote of their governing board, and also following some state guidance on that. Next slide, please. So why are we updating the Mather Airport land use compatibility plan? Well, the plan is about 25 years old now, so it's a bit outdated. We try to update these every 20 years or so. In addition, Sacramento County updated the Mather Airport master plan. There's been a lot of changes in aircraft and operations and facilities that the plan addresses that, and normally in correspondence, as master plans are updated, we update the AOUCP. Also, new development is being planned near Mather Airport, so we want to make sure that we have the most current standards in place. This plan is requested for and paid for by Sacramento Department of Airports, which is both the owner and the operator of the airport. Next slide, please. So what's in the airport land use compatibility plan? Well, there's general policies that describe what the plan is for and the state statutes that surround this. But the real factors, the most important things that are in this in terms of substance are the standards for noise, safety, height, and overflight notification. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a graphic idea of kind of how we look at it. So at the very bottom, you can kind of see the outline of the airport runway at Mather, and then we apply the state standards for safety zones. Some areas are much more likely to have a crash if there were to have one, and then other areas, depending on where they are in relation to the airport runway, would be less so, and then some areas are completely unlikely to have an accident. We also look at noise. We look at the noise that the aircraft have, and then try to figure out what are acceptable areas of noise tolerance, and then the types of uses. For instance, you wouldn't want a hospital or elementary school immediately near the end of a runway where it's the noisiest, and it's also the most likely to have a crash area. So that would be an example. Airspace protection is about height, so we wouldn't want cell towers near runways. And then finally, we have what's called the overflight area, and that's a perceived subjective impact of aircraft. So we want to consider that as well. Next slide, please. So here's just an example of the noise contours. There's certain areas that are more tolerant of noise, such as industrial areas, and there's areas, like I mentioned, schools and hospitals and other residential areas that you wouldn't want to be near the airport. Next slide, please. So here we would look at the different noise contours, and then we would identify different land uses and what's allowable depending on what the noise factor is. Next slide, please. These are just representative pages out of the plan. This is an example of the safety contours, again, identified by the state based on where they're statistically most likely to be a crash. Those areas that are closest to the end of the runway are most likely to have an accident. And then as you get farther away from that, less likely. So next slide, please. So basically, everything's wrapped up into this plan. We made sure that the neighboring agencies had a chance to take a look at this and helped us draft this plan. and what impacts it would have to their areas. They met 4 times during the course of the project. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned we started, this is about 5 years old. We started in 2017, starting with an agreement with the county, worked our way of developing the plan with the advisory committee. We did the environmental document, including what the displacement analysis would be in 2020, in 2021, including a public review of the draft document. And we also did a public meeting. In the interim time, there was some discussions between, separate from this process, between the Sacramento County and one of the airport, one of the land use developers near the airport. Those discussions have finished. There's been no impact to the draft plan that we had last year. And the letter that was provided by the land use developer has since been rescinded. That was submitted to the AOEC. They've rescinded the comments that they provided last year. So with that, we have the draft plan that is ready for the board's consideration for adoption. Next slide, please. So if you were to decide to approve it, you'd be approving the negative, the initial study negative declaration. That's the associated environmental documents that go with the plan. There's the plan itself, and then there is a resolution that, and I need to apologize to the land use committee, that was not part of their packet, but we realized that in preparing the board's packet that it needed to have a resolution in it. So if approved, it would take all 3 of these actions here. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg. I believe Director Stollard has his hand up. And before Director Stollard, I just want to, Greg kind of went quickly through the other process that took place with the developer. And let me say it was extensive. I was a part of some of that and really appreciate SACOG staff's role in kind of acting as a mediator of sorts to help us break through some of the log jams that we were hitting, and it came out to end up to be a good process. So thank you to staff for that. With that, Director Stollard.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kennedy. I was actually part of the 1997 process, and there was a great deal of development pressure at that time. The contours were actually considerably larger than they ended up being after 1997. And a very careful analysis was done as we narrowed the scope of the protected areas. So my question of staff is, are we narrowing those contours any further? Is that happening as part of this?
The contours have changed, and I'll be glad to defer to airport staff or our consultant, but the contours have changed just by the nature of changing in operations and aircraft. If Glenn or Chris would like to add anything, feel free.
This is Glenn Rickleton of the Sacramento County Department of Airports. The contours, as Greg says, have changed. They're not necessarily larger, particularly on the northeast area where most of the flights are approaches. So they're straight in approaches into the airport. So that really hasn't changed. It's extended out a little bit because we have some larger aircraft coming in and more frequent operations by military aircraft that are add to that contour. But on the departure end, or to the southwest end, when the aircraft depart, we've since 1997, we noticed that they've have greater performance, so they're able to climb faster and turn sooner. So they get higher, but they turn tighter. So it's resulted in a shift of the contour to the south from its original southwest extension that was probably familiar with in the last contour. So it's not really larger, but it has shifted, and that was some of the focus on the discussion that Supervisor Kennedy mentioned in his introduction here.
Okay, I just say to my colleagues, we pay very little attention to this issue. It comes around rarely, but we are charged with protecting the interests of a major capital facility, that being Mather Airfield. With great potential for the future of Sacramento, both economically and any other area that might affect, the ability of an airport to function. On the other hand, we have neighbors around it. Folsom, I know, has always been really concerned about the airport. we heard a lot of feedback in 1997. Supervisor Dave Cox, who was actually championing the narrowing of the contours. So I'm happy to support the action. I'm glad that we had everybody come together on this, but this is really a serious action we're being asked to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Stollard. Again, staff is not completely characterizing that there were some tense moments. So understood, but we ended up in a good place, I believe. So thank you for your historical perspective. Any other questions of the board? Comments?
I just have a general question.
Yes, sir.
Was this update taken to the local governments who it most impacts? Rancho Cordova, Folsom, Sacramento County Board of Supervisors for comment or action?
We've been working with the staffs at those agencies for the last 5 years on this. We have not taken it to the individual governing bodies for them, but the staffs have not, at those jurisdictions, did not indicate that they requested that.
There are lots of impacts, noise, and otherwise. Obviously, they're impacted by this plan as well as land use decisions in my jurisdiction, some of which are pretty hard for the public to understand. You know, you can build a giant warehouse, but you can't build a park, sort of restrictions, or you can't build a park where you expect a certain density of people to gather. So that those sorts of questions pop up constantly in my jurisdiction with regard to parcels near this airport. And it might be helpful to have staff actually talk either to my city council or some other appropriate venue if other local governments are interested on topics like that.
Staff will be glad to work with your staff and offer a presentation to any governing body, including your city council.
And for Folsom's sake, our issue is less about land use and more about just the frequency of overflights. That's been the issue over time. And we actually did have a presentation from our staff about some elements of this about 1.5 years ago. So I think our city council is relatively up to date with these adjustments. So it would be worthwhile for them to bring it back to us as well.
Noted.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Madam Clerk, do we have any public comment?
No, there's no public comment.
Okay, then do we have a motion? Chair will move the item. Is there a second? I heard a voice.
Vice Chair Kennedy, that was Director Desmond.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Kennedy and a second by Director Desmond. Please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Baines?
Aye.
Bernasconi?
Yes.
Bradford?
Aye.
Branscombe? Absent Boulahan?
Aye.
Burris?
Yes.
Clark Kretz?
Yes.
Desmond?
Aye.
Frericks?
Aye.
Frost?
Aye.
Gallardo?
Aye.
Gog?
Yes.
Gore?
Aye.
Guerrero?
Aye.
Harris? Director Harris? Yeah, thank you. Joyner?
Yes.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton? Absent New?
Aye.
Sander?
Aye.
Zaragoza?
Aye.
Sailor absent Chenier, absent Spokely, absent Stallard,
Aye.
Soon,
Aye.
Thomas absent West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
Chair Jennings is absent, motion carries.
Thank you very much. We will now adjourn as the Airport Land Use Commission and reconvene as the SACOG Board. Is there need to call the roll, Madam Clerk?
We'll let the record show that Director Baines is present.
Thank you very much. We will now move into item number 13, which is closed session. Madam Clerk, are we going to go into a breakout room or how are we doing this?
We would ask our board members who are participating online to please be patient and you can stay on the line, stay logged in. Our board members who are present, if you can also just stand by while we have staff and other guests vacate the room. And then we'll let you know.
Incredible.
It's got to be a first. This has
It's got to be a first.
Peaches.
Your crop right there.
Yeah.
Peaches.
Vice Chair Kennedy, we are live again.
Okay, thank you very much. We will reconvene in open session. We need to call the roll to reestablish a quorum. Are we good?
It looks like we still have a quorum, so we are good. Is there any action to report from closed session?
There's
Council?
nothing to report.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Our next item is action item number 14, approve resolution of intention to amend Calpers contract presented by Eric Johnson, SACOG staff.
Mr.
Good
Johnson.
morning. Yes, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and good morning, members of the board. This item before you today is an administrative cleanup to our contract with Calpers. With a routine review of our Calpers contract, they noted that the way we were treating hourly employees was out of compliance with some changes in Calpers law. So this amendment to our Calpers contract simply will just bring us into compliance with Calpers law. There should not be any financial impact because we don't hire employees on an hourly basis for extended periods of time. So it really won't impact our bottom line at all. But this is a two-part step. Today, you're simply approving a resolution with the intention to amend the contract. Next month, you will actually approve the amendment to the contract. And per CalPERS regulations, you must do this as an action item, which is why it's on the action part of the agenda.
Stallard moves the item, Mr. Vice Chair.
I'll second.
Okay, who's second?
Galdo.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a motion by Director Sullard, second by Director Gallego. Do we have any public comments?
I see no public comment.
Okay, any other questions of the board? Please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi,
Yes.
Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe, absent Boulahan,
Aye.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond, Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gog,
Yes.
Gore. Aye. Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton absent New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Zaragoza,
Aye.
Sailor absent Chenier, absent Spokely, absent Stallard,
Aye.
Thune,
Aye.
Thomas absent West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye,
and Chair Jennings is absent. Motion carries.
thank you. Next item, please.
Thank you. Next item is action item number 15, revolving match program funding awards presented by Chris Doherty of SACOG staff.
Chris, you're up.
Good morning, Vice Chair, members of the board. Chris Doherty, the Funding and Grants Program Manager here at SACOG. In April of this year, the SACOG board approved the guidelines and budget for the revolving match program. This 4-county program is designed to help our partners agencies better compete for state and federal grant programs. To help our region further implement our local priorities and the MTPSCS. The board approved a range of budget from approximately $19 million to $31 million for that program for the 2 years of the duration of that program. The program is designed to be continually opened with awards being awarded about every 6 months. This is part of the shift in how we are reconfiguring the funding round to better react to the funding landscape that's happening at both the federal and state level. So we're happy to move this forward. Staff has released a call for projects in May with applications that were due on July 1st. We had received 4 applications for this program. Capital Corridor, Sacramento to Roseville third track for $2 million. City of Sacramento, Marysville Vision Zero project for $4 million. City of West Sacramento, I Street deck conversion project for $1.5 million. And Sacramento County for the US 50 Gold Line corridor enhancements for $4 million. Staff is recommending to move all projects, that they all be approved for this round of funding. And it is important to note that awarding funds through this program and this action, we don't program those funds until the projects are awarded for the grant programs they're pursuing at the federal and state level. So that means that they are not successful. These funds are not programmed directly to the project in perpetuity. We then pull them back and make them ready for the next revolving match round. So this is approximately $11.5 million in possible funding. And to put that into perspective, if all of these projects are successful, this would be leveraging that $11.5 million to bring in almost $312 million in projects in the region for those 4 projects. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions you have.
All right, any questions of the board? Any questions first from the room?
Director Bradford, just a comment. So thank you for sharing that statistic about the 11 million and what that could leverage if they were all successful. I think that's an absolutely amazing statistic, and I appreciate hearing that. So thank you.
Any others? Okay, is there a motion, or do we have any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, then do we have a motion?
Bradford will move.
Second by Frericks.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Bradford, a second by Director Frericks. Please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Baines? Director Baines, could you indicate your vote, please? Okay, I'll come back to you. Bernasconi?
Yes.
Bradford?
Aye.
Branscombe, absent. Houlihan?
Aye.
Burris?
Yes.
Clark Kretz?
Yes.
Desmond?
Aye.
Frericks?
Aye.
Frost?
Aye.
Gallardo?
Aye.
Gog?
Yes.
Gore?
Aye.
Guerrero?
Aye.
Harris?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Kozlowski?
Yes.
Lozano?
Aye.
Middleton, absent. New?
Aye.
Sander?
Aye.
Zaragoza?
Aye.
Sailor, absent. Chenier, absent. Spokely? Absent. Stollard?
Aye.
Thune?
Aye.
Thomas, absent. West?
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy?
Aye.
Chair Jennings is absent, and Director Baines, if you're there, could you indicate your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
All right, we are on item number 16, an information item. Next item.
Item 16 is 2024 Blueprint Draft Pathways Land Use Assumptions presented by Dob Caden of SACOG staff.
Mr. Caden.
Good morning, board. So this is an information item that we presented to both the Transportation and the Land Use and Natural Resources Committees this month to talk through the land use side of our 2024 Blueprint Pathways. At Lunar, we dug a little bit deeper on the regulatory and the market factors that go into those land use assumptions with a guest presentation from Alex Steinberger of Cascadia Partners. Alex is actually here with us this morning and is going to give a similar presentation to the whole board. Before I turn it over to Alex, though, we wanted to just provide some context on the blueprint and our pathways for the folks who didn't see those. These pathways, the board is going to use to better understand how the land use and transportation decisions that we make as part of this plan are going to affect our future, affect our ability as a region to achieve our regional goals around the triple bottom line. So our land use assumptions start with our regional growth projections. The board adopted those this February, and those projections said that our region is going to grow by about 30% higher than today in terms of housing by 2050. We go through a process then of assigning where that growth will go all the way down to the parcel level as a part of this plan. The presentation today really gets to the question of how do we make those decisions? Attachment A in your packets describes in much more detail than I'll cover today the regulatory, the market, the performance factors that we consider in developing those assumptions. But the foundation of those assumptions are the regulatory side on the left, your local plans, your entitlements. So every 4 years, we catalog what we call the build out inventory to better understand what is allowed by your general plans, your specific plans, all your zoning. And together, all of that forms the basis or the envelope for our regional land use scenarios. As you're going to hear from Alex, we won a Caltrans planning grant that has allowed us to work with a consultant to do a really comprehensive update to our build out inventory as a part of this plan cycle. And it's really allowed us to kind of do some unique analyses that we haven't done in a couple cycles. A key finding out of that analysis is that if you were to just add up all of the plan growth across the region, stapling together everyone's general plans, specific plans, we actually have total capacity that's orders of magnitude more than what we're expecting to happen by 2050, when we look at those regional growth projections. So we inherently, as a part of this process, are having to make choices as to which growth to include in the plan where. We also build into our assumptions a variety of market factors that seek to approximate things like the financial feasibility of projects, whether there's a strong demand for that type of project in that part of the region. And then critically, we also have a set of policy and performance considerations that we have organized into the triple bottom line framework for this plan. So we need to balance all of these considerations and eventually, come together on a regional plan for land use and transportation over a 30-year period. So to inform that process and put data in your hands as you make those decisions, we're embarking on a scenario planning effort called Pathways. On the land use side, these pathways are going to explore some pretty diverging futures on where we actually accommodate growth in our region. So pathway 1 is largely expanding outward, with the majority of growth happening outside of our existing communities. Existing communities are shown here in the kind of darker blue, and then the expansion out in pathway 1 largely happening in those lighter blue colors. And then, it kind of goes the gambit. In the middle, we have pathway 2, which is similar to our adopted plan. And then pathway 3 is the bookend on the infill side, right, where we're focusing on revitalizing our existing communities, where we have infill in every community across the region. Those are our existing communities, right? So the choices that we make as a region around where and how we grow have monumental implications for the policy goals that we have as part of the plan. The pathways are going to give us a much better understanding of how that growth impacts our triple bottom line and impacts our regional goals. In the early part of 2023, we'll actually be presenting the performance of these pathways. We're modeling them now, but we'll actually have all that modeling done, and we'll be able to present the performance metrics across the triple bottom line for each of these pathways. And that will sort of help us to make our decision as we settle in on a preferred land use and transportation pathway, which is scheduled now for next summer. Before we do all of that, I want to make sure that we talk about all of the inputs here. So our guest speaker, Alex Steinberger from Cascadia Partners, is going to talk about all of the work that we've done over the last year and a half to better understand those regulatory and market factors that go into our regional land use assumptions. So Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Dav, and thank you, members of the SACOG board. My name is Alex Steinberger. I'm the lead consultant for Cascadia Partners working on this Caltrans funded project. Next slide. Want to acknowledge the team because this was definitely a collaborative effort, lots of data, lots of research, and it could not have been completed without the help of Dav and Indrani Campella at SACOG. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is some of the technical details of how we are supporting the work that's happening on the MTP SCS. And as we know, an SCS is supposed to guide local land use planning toward a growth pattern that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. And those greenhouse gas emissions standards are getting more and more rigorous. And to put forth a land use pattern that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, it's only useful for the region if it's achievable, right? So what we're helping SACOG do, in essence, is toe that line between what is visionary in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but what's also market feasible. That's critical. Next slide. So what we did is we went beyond what is typically done for these types of regional plans, and we modeled what we call build out capacity in 3 ways. And build out capacity is simply the amount of growth we think we can accommodate within the region's general plans or zoning or market strength. And as Dav mentioned, we have much more build out capacity than we actually need to accommodate the growth we think we're going to get by 2050. So the 3 ways that we did this is first by looking at what general plans allowed. This is sort of the typical way of doing this. Then we took that a step further and looked at what local zoning could actually enable. And finally, and this is, I think, the most novel piece of what we did, is we looked at what local rents, land prices, and sales prices would enable to be built, if you think about that from a market feasibility perspective. Next slide. So all of this work was based on, as I mentioned, lots and lots of research, lots of data, and critical to that was this database that now exists of all of the region's general plans, specific plans, and zoning classifications, and all of the standards that go along with all of those. So things like heights and densities and setbacks. So that's a major product of what we undertook. Next slide. So the first version of build out capacity, and this is again the more typical way of doing it, is just looking at what general plans allow at face value. So here we look at the maximum heights and densities and floor to area ratios that exist in general plans. And this is really important because the MTP SCS has to be consistent with local plans to some extent. So knowing what general plans allow is a critical part of the process. The zoning-based build-out capacity goes a step further because we know that general plans aren't what a developer has to work within when they're trying to get something built. They're dealing with zoning. And zoning is supposed to implement general plans, ideally. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes the zones that are in place don't allow the densities that are envisioned in a general plan to get built. And so we did a thorough scan of the whole region's zoning in each jurisdiction and identified some areas where zoning may be a barrier to achieving what the general. Next slide. Here's an example of what that looks like. We're zoomed into an area around Rancho Cordova and the unincorporated part of Sacramento County. Here we're seeing that we can assess zoning barriers in 2 ways. On the left, we're showing where there are major zoning inconsistencies. So in the yellow, those are areas where the parking requirement is too high to achieve the density that the general plan says should exist there. And in the teal, we have areas with very large minimum lot sizes that are keeping densities from actually being achievable. And on the right, we can compare those outcomes to what the general plan says and assess how much of a difference, how much of a barrier that zoning is actually creating. Are we only able to achieve 50% of what the general plan says, or 70 or 90%? So that regional data set now exists for SACOG to use in the MTP process. The final version of how we assessed capacity is this market-based version of capacity, because we know that what zoning allows isn't always feasible, at least in the current market conditions that we have. And so what we did is we looked at rents, construction costs, sales prices, and land costs, and we assessed where certain types of residential buildings would be feasible given those things. And so what it allows us to do is whittle away further at the capacity that's in the region and identify only those areas where the market exists today to actually get the type of development that zoning and general plans say should be there built. Next slide. So I'm going to go through a series of 3 slides here where I show you in the same area how the capacity estimates differ from our general plan version of capacity to our zoning to our market-based version of capacity. So here's the general plan take on capacity in that same area around Rancho Cordova and Carmichael. And you can see in these blue colors, the darker the color, the higher the density of development that is possible given the general plan. So you can also see in these red outlined areas, those are our center and corridor communities. So you see a lot of alignment there between those geographies and higher density general plan designations. Not surprising. Next slide. So as we go from general plan, what the general plans allow to what zoning allows, we can see that zoning is a little bit of a constraint here in some of these areas. As we see the colors go from a darker color to a lighter color, that is showing that there is a reduction in achievable density. So here we're pointing to two areas where we had zoning constraints that are keeping these areas from building out to their general plan densities. Next slide. And here we can see with the market-based build-out capacity, things get even lighter. So we even further peel back on the amount of development that we think is possible. And this is because not all of these areas have strong real estate markets. In some of them, rents and sales prices are higher than others, and in others, there may not be as much available low-value land. So that's how those three estimates differ. And if we scale that up to the region in the next slide, we can see that it makes a pretty big difference depending on how we look at things. If we just assume that general plans are the guide for how much capacity we have, we think we have about 3 million dwelling units region-wide. Zoning knocks about 10% off of that, knocks about 300,000 units of capacity out. And then the market-based build-out goes down to 1.9 million. So it's much more constrained. But as Dov mentioned, in using any of these estimates, we still have much more capacity than is needed to accommodate growth to 2050. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about where this capacity exists. We just looked at it at the whole region rolled up, but the region is not created equal in terms of where the capacity exists. And we actually see that we have more than 2/3 of capacity in what we call existing communities. So established communities and center and corridor communities. And interestingly, as we go from general plan to zone capacity to market feasible capacity, we whittle away more of the capacity in our potential developing communities and rural residential communities. So there's more market capacity in our centers and corridors and our established communities than in other parts of the region. Next slide. It's also interesting to look at this in terms of what's happened recently. What's the market actually delivering? And this is a pretty big deal. In your region, the vast majority of jobs and housing development in the recent past, this is from 2016 to 2020, has occurred in these existing communities, established communities and centers and corridors. However, if we look at the housing, we can see that there's one particular geography that isn't maybe performing the way it should, and that is centers and corridors. Only 18% of recent housing growth has occurred in centers and corridors. And as we saw from the previous slide, that's where a lot of your future capacity exists within the region. So what's going on with that trend? Well, let's look at that just a little bit further. So here we see how much development has happened where over every year from 2007 to 2021. So you can see, again, the vast majority of housing development is happening in your established communities and center and corridor communities, but the center and corridor communities are still a very small share of that overall growth picture. And they're remaining relatively flat. We're not seeing an upward trend. And if you compare that to where the capacity exists between now and 2050, it's a much larger share in these center and corridor communities. So this is a source of untapped potential for the region. There is a lot of market potential, favorable market conditions that could drive development in these center and corridor communities, but something is happening. There is a disconnect there that's keeping these areas from performing the way we expect they would. Next slide. So what is that? Well, broadly speaking, we call that friction, development friction. And there are three types of development friction. One is infrastructure-based, A lot of infill development along these center and corridor communities is hard to get done because of some of the infrastructure conditions. You are as a region doing a lot to address this. You have your Green Means Go program to deal with a lot of the sewer and water and other less visible infrastructure issues that can keep these developments from happening. There are also zoning barriers like high parking requirements or setbacks. These are being addressed throughout the region by several communities. For instance, the city of Sacramento is reducing and eliminating in some areas their parking requirements. And development review, lengthy development processes, uncertain outcomes. These can add cost and uncertainty to development projects, but there are several communities and statewide efforts, in particular objective design standards, that are helping to make development review process a little more streamlined. So as you go forward into this cycle of the MTP, SCS, and beyond, looking for ways to reduce development friction could be just what's needed to get those center and corridor communities to perform the way we would expect. And as an example of that, in the next slide.
Mr. Vice Chair, can I ask you a question on this slide? This is Director Desmond. Or would you prefer I wait till the presentation's over?
Let's wait till the presentation's over.
Nearly done, just 2 more slides here. So in the next slide, just to show you one of those barriers, one of those friction points, zoning. This map shows where currently, broadly speaking, quadplexes or fourplexes are not allowed based on local zoning. But what if they were? Would the market deliver fourplexes in these areas? Well, if we go to the next slide, based on our analysis, these are areas, these are parcels where we think fourplexes would be feasible to construct given rents, sales prices, and land costs. The zoning just isn't in place to allow that to occur. So again, this is an example of one of those friction points that hopefully can start to get addressed through regional efforts and efforts at the local level. So that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take questions at this point.
Thank you very much. And with that, Director Desmond.
Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. And most of my discussions with James about some of these very things, how do we get past those friction points? And so a question I had for you, it seems to me like, at least in Sacramento County, in terms of the unincorporated area, which makes up 95% of my district that I represent, we're dealing with a lot of these challenges that you bring up. Are you talking to local infill developers specifically about those friction points? And because to me, it's sometimes it's maddening how we try to create better conditions at the county to encourage some infill projects and some of these photographs you had in your presentation there, but we're just not able to bring them to the table or even get them interested. So I'm just curious about the nature of your conversations with the kind of the infill development community about those friction points.
I can answer that. Yeah, so certainly we have been having conversations with the actual builders. I mean, I think that's, at the core of what we're trying to get at with this work on the market with Cascadia is to really ground truth our planning, which, frankly, for a long time has been disconnected from the development community in some ways. And so what we've been trying to do certainly recently is to try to make sure that it is connected. And so the price signals that went into the market analysis that Alex was talking about, those are real numbers. Those are real rents. Those are real vacancy rates. So that's one aspect. Those are the same stats that the builders are using. And then we also are facilitating conversations with the builders themselves. We've had a few, as you recall, builders, both nonprofit, affordable developers, as well as market rate ones that have come to speak to the board over the last few years. We've had them involved extensively so in the Green Means Go process as well. And it's really informed a lot of the policy recommendations that we've been talking about.
Okay, thanks. Maybe I could follow up with you at some point, James, and your staff, specifically with regard to some of these corridors and these older unincorporated communities in my district with developers maybe you've specifically spoken to about those areas?
Yeah, and Director Desmond, just, as I was saying earlier, also on your consent calendar today was an item to get an Urban Land Institute development panel out to North Watt and Folsom in the next few months, which is getting the private sector to come in and actually understand that. And I would say for all of you, and now there's many of you that have green zones, this is the kind of thing that, if we can work with you and help you to get developers to come and look at those green zones and say, well, here's what it would take for me. The other thing I also want to add in there, there's a lot of friction, but the other one are fees. And I know Director Sander has been all over this one. And, look, we are just scratching the surface on green zones and infill. But if we could get some of those fees relieved, rebalanced, just, looked at, I know, so that's another big point of friction that I know you all feel every day, but understanding the developers and their perspective is, absolutely critical.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Swin.
Thank you, Vice Chair Kennedy. Dov and Alex and James, I just want to commend you for taking this more in-depth look at these challenges of infill. I think this is the first time, you've analyzed the financial feasibility of it. I've heard, I've made a number of people on this board have made comments before in the past about, how do we plan for this, or how do we actually make this pencil? It doesn't acknowledge the financial constraints that you've identified here. So I'm really pleased to see this analysis take place. I was hoping or wondering if we can go maybe even a step further. And because the other thing that isn't accounted for is, these landowners, right? The willingness to actually even, part with their land or develop in these areas. And so that's another constraint in addition to, another friction point, I think, that in addition to the things you've already identified. And, understanding, these landowners and what their plans are, if they'd even be willing to sell and develop, I think would be good to know. And then, to Director Desmond's point earlier, how about we work with the North State BIA and the local realtors and, focus on these areas. There could be an awareness about these sites, getting more details in terms of these hurdles and developing, packages, if you will, that would identify all the challenges, even some rough pro formas. I think whatever you can do to make it easier to get the word out to the development community and brokers about these possibilities, I think would just increase our chances that these corridors could develop sooner. Thank you.
Director Joyner.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo the appreciation for the deep dive on this, especially with the inclusion of market feasibility. It has been absent in all the past studies that I've seen. Many of us around the table have pointed that out along the way, so I'm really pleased to see it there. You might want to add one additional element to that. And while market feasibility takes into account the developer's costs and their ability to build it, they're only going to build it if there's a market for it. And each and every one of our communities has a different market. In Little Lincoln, California, with a population of 50,000, there are going to be very few people that are going to be buying into a fourplex project. They're not going to be interested in that. Most are going to want, if they're attached, they're going to want something that is, for lack of a better term, a little high end. There should be a payoff for going into that density. They're going to want that a given lifestyle to be reflected in that. So when we say market feasibility, there is also the market itself, the willingness of buyers to purchase that project or that product. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that. The builders are going to know what that is. But again, I really want to commend all of you for folding in this market feasibility element. I think it's been incredibly important to do that. So well done.
Thank you, Director. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is David Sander. I seem to have lost the ability to raise my hand.
Director Sander, I fully expected you to chime in on this.
In any case, Paul, I want to thank you for those comments. Those were right on target, and market is definitely the need that we have. We generally overlook, in this space about talking about planners talking about what is ideal in a given location. You see this nationwide in the literature. You see this at all the meetings you go to. There's sort of an absence of market reality to a lot of it. It's sort of planner utopia viewpoint of things. So it's really good to actually see some real analysis. Now, that being said, I immediately have to shoot at it. The data that is representative in the graphs or in the charts that I saw here looks dated to me, like it might be 20 years old. Based on some of the graphics I saw, there's development in Rancho Cordova, for example, east of Sunrise, probably 20,000 people that have been there 15 years. That's shown as completely new development with nothing on it currently. So that's not accurate. The largest site for fourplexes in Rancho Cordova in your graphic was a school site, not likely to flip to fourplexes. So that gives me a lot of pause about the overall market analysis. But I can tell you a little story about Mill Station. Every expert we've had come through for the past 20 years has pointed to the intersection of Matherfield Road and Folsom Boulevard as the spot for economic development in Rancho Cordova. This is the spot where it has to happen. We've been unable to interest any private sector developer in doing anything at that intersection. It's right at a light rail station. We were able to partner with the community college district, build a community college mini campus on that site, and our city acquired some significant property there, and we are pursuing development on that site. In the process of pursuing that development, we wanted some rental housing, some dense rental housing right across the light rail station. After consulting with dozens of developers, no one was willing to take a step towards rental housing at that site. And this is a large site, it's like 11 acres. And any portion of it, because no bank was willing to lend. And when you dive into why is no bank willing to lend, there's no proven rent possible at that site that would support the construction cost. And part of that factor is, how do your schools rate? What are the local amenities? What are you close to? So, if you're going to do market realism, you've got to get, I think, down to that granular level of, you could propose fourplexes in all these places or more density or apartment buildings. But if you want people with families to live there, then a school system with local schools below a 5 ain't going to cut it. People are going to choose to live somewhere else, as we sort of see in national trends. You can live in an urban area for a while, but if you have kids, you sort of leave that and go to the suburbs because the schools are. Those kind of considerations, I think, have to be a factor here, or we're still sort of in planner utopia. So I think this is a step in the right direction, but I think we've got a ways to go.
Appreciate your comments, Director Sander, and I think it's in the same vein as some of the other comments around taking that next step to go into more of the site-specific research, which I'll just note, as a 6-county region, it's really difficult for us to basically do a site-specific analysis everywhere. So we try to do our analysis based on data that's available for across the 6-county region, which Alex can maybe chime in a little bit more about sort of the inputs on the market side. But that said, we have done that deep dive in a few places, and for example, I think North Watt was mentioned earlier this meeting. That's a place where the ULI group is going to do a little bit more site-specific research. We've had that group come in and do work on some of our blue line station areas in Sacramento before. We've also dug a little deeper in the light rail station areas in Rancho Cordova, as well as elsewhere in the region through the TOD toolkit. But regardless, Director Sander, we'd be happy to follow up directly with you on some of the more site-specific work you'd like to do with Rancho Cordova, maybe after the meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Director Sander. Good comments. Any other questions or comments? Anyone in the room?
Yes, Vice Chair Kennedy, this is Director Bradford. I have a couple questions and comments. First, I wanted to echo something that Director Sander brought up related to developing communities and maybe when something changes from light blue to darker blue on that map. I have a similar situation in my district in Yuba County. We have a community that has about 15,000 people now, and it's all light blue still. And I don't know if that's just because of it's newer or if part of that should be, the part that's actually been developed should be in dark blue as it is at this point. I would say an established community, but I know that depends on the definition of what that really means. So that's kind of the first question. And then the other, I loved seeing the data and the maps showing a disconnect between general plan or specific plan and zoning, and then even more importantly, kind of market conditions. Is there a plan to create maps like that for all of the jurisdictions, and then maybe take time to meet with the various jurisdictions to show them those maps and make them aware of those disconnects and where there are opportunities and maybe where we hope there's opportunities, but maybe the market says otherwise?
I can maybe start with the first question, which is a very good one, which is when is a specific plan area or a part of your community considered an established community? When is it a potentially developing one? Any definition that we have is going to feel somewhat arbitrary. You have to draw the line somewhere. The threshold that we have used historically for potential developing communities is 50% absorption. So on the residential side. So as soon as a community crosses over 50% of the planned units as built, then it's shifted over to established communities. So those historical permit numbers by community type that Alex was going through actually has a rolling definition of community types for each 4-year plan cycle. Maybe that was too much detail, but that's sort of how we think about it. And then
very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I guess for your second question, we would be happy to sit down with staff from any community to talk through this analysis. This is one of the great parts of this work that Cascadia Partners has done, is that we have this comprehensive inventory across the region. It's going to look a little bit, it won't look as pretty as the slideshow for every community yet, but we can certainly have that individual conversation with any of our member agencies.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? Madam Clerk, is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, well, with that, thank you very much, Dov and Alex. This is actually pretty exciting. While everything may need some tweaks here and there, and Director Sanders certainly makes some good points. This direction is one of the best things I've seen in the decades that I've been dealing with land use. We've all, I like Director Sanders. I'm sure you didn't coin it, but I have not heard planning utopia before. The best laid plans don't mean anything if you don't have that feasibility. And that has been not up in the top 3 in the past in many jurisdictions, ours included. And without it, the plan's as good as the paper it's written on. So I think that this is a great direction and great work with Alex and Dom. Appreciate it. All right. With that, we come to item number 17, Madam Clerk.
Item number 17 is in our report section of the agenda. It's the chair's report, board members' reports, and executive director's report.
I will start with the vice chair's report. Not much to report, but I do want to let the board know and directors know that the nominating committee is getting ready to get to work, but we need a committee first. So if you are interested in serving in this year's nominating committee, please let Lynette know, and it will be the chair to appoint that committee. Hopefully they'll do a better job than last year's committee, and you'll have a much better vice chair next year. But if you are interested, please, I encourage you.
Don't speak too soon, Mr. Vice Chair. We have to reaffirm that decision going forward.
This is true. Therefore, I nominate Mr. Stollard. Okay, so please let Lynette know if you are interested. I will say I've served on it in the past, and it's not only a good opportunity to have a role in the future of the organization, but I also found it was a good opportunity to sit around a table with a small group of fellow directors that you don't always get to. So it's good for those reasons as well. So next, are there any board member reports?
It's Director Gallardo. I'll jump in here. Just real quick, we were very fortunate yesterday. A few of you know about 4 years ago, the city was able to purchase a defunct golf course. So we have 184 acres dead center in the middle of Rockland, and we've been able to open up the old golf cart path slowly but surely. And yesterday we opened up the second phase, so an additional little over a mile of cart paths. And construction for the next phase will start next month. And then we'll also have a large community meeting for a planning process where the opportunity for people to come forward and say what they'd like to see in the recreation area. It's not going to be a formal park, it's be more of a passive recreation area. But really excited to see we got more trails coming. Finally, our most requested item.
Great. Thank you very much, Director. Director Suen, followed by Director Stoller.
Thanks, Vice Chair Kennedy. Most of you, I think, heard it before we got started, but we have a new casino that just opened up. A lot of great dining and beverage options. So when you have a moment, please come visit. Thank you.
Yes, I wanted to mention, I wouldn't normally mention this, but the current production at the Woodland Opera House in the Heights by Lin-Manuel and Miranda is probably the finest production ever done there in its 25-year new history. And it features a director from Sacramento, operates a dance academy, costuming, casting, singing, dancing, and a live orchestra, first time since the pandemic. So it's the next 2 weekends, Friday and Saturday at 7:30, Sundays at 2. Those of you who would like a great cultural theater experience, I recommend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I will be taking you up on that. Anyone else in the room? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Corliss.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Per my report that was sent out, really delighted to announce that the region has won 2 federal raise grants. I know there were lots of applications, but happy to say that Yuba Sutter Transit has won $15 million to build their new next generation transit facility in Yuba County. I know Director Bradford has been following that very closely, which is very exciting. That is not fully funded yet. There is still a funding gap. They have to move from downtown Marysville. And the other raise grant was an incredible team effort with a lot of your staff here at SACOG working on this. It's a $5 million planning grant to develop a 6-county bottom-up strategy with a lot of community engagement that's very equity oriented, a partnership with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, El Dorado County Transportation Commission, a nonprofit named Civic Thread that is doing more and more community engagement and outreach around transportation, Yuba Sutter Blue Zones up in Yuba Sutter, and UC Institute for Transportation Studies as well. So this is looking at how can we elevate and accelerate microtransit, micromobility, EV car share in rural communities, active modes, and more. So stay tuned. We're very excited to have pulled that down. Speaking of grants, and per my update, there is a tremendous number of grant opportunities just in transportation and for Green Means Go that are coming. We sent a note out, and again, working very closely with EDCTC and PCTPA, providing some technical assistance to any of your jurisdictions, cities and counties, transit agencies as needed. Next couple of grant programs are the federal level are Safe Streets for All and Reconnecting Communities. Safe Streets is a big street safety, complete streets, active modes, safe streets, safe routes to school, etc. Those are due September 16th. So check my update and let us know if you'd like some technical assistance. Or just flip it to your staff. I think people are pretty aware at this point. More grants. We have pushed back our deadline for Green Means Go early activation projects to September. I'm happy that we can do that because we actually worked with our partners at the state to push out the deadline for expenditure of funds, which means we had more of your jurisdictions who were actually able to do that and spend those funds. So green means go early activation coming up September, and the big planning and capital pot coming after that. Also in September, a huge plus up in active transportation. The state budget plussed up with the big transportation deal, active transportation funds. We're now above 45 million for a regional call for projects across all 6 counties. So hoping a lot of those active transportation projects will be coming into us. And finally, really interesting project that is bubbling up through the Central Valley, California forward. The Fresno Council of Governments will be coming virtually to your lunch extension of Transportation Committee Thursday, September 1st to talk about a big inland ports effort, which is looking at a network of inland ports, multimodal, intermodal, so we can actually bring more rail up from Southern California and do truck transfer with a big emphasis on zero emission facilities. So stay tuned for that. It would be a big game changer, but it gets to supply chain, it gets to air quality, and it also gets to a lot of the truck traffic and truck congestion. So should be good lunch on September 1st. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Is there any questions of James in this report? All right, thank you very much. Items 18 through 23 are receive and file. Our next meeting is on Thursday, September 15th, 2022 at 9:30. And with that, I thank you all for your patience.